everyone, and all of the Radio Jingle fans out there in the world. I'm Pedro Ariel, content and video editor, creator of the K2Play YouTube channel, and today we're going to do some jingle comparisons and references between two really legendary radio stations. The first one being 66 WNBC Radio in New York, the United States, and the second one being Radio 10 in the Netherlands. So, what I'm going to play is a fragment from Rewound Radio's John Wolfert's Jingles and Music live show. And this fragment is very interesting to hear because he is talking about the history of the NBC chimes, one of America's truly legendary audio signatures. And of course, one of the many cases of sound branding that works both in radio and television. So, where did this thing happen? Well, you're gonna hear it right here, just for you.
This next one comes from our good friend Bart van Gogh in the Netherlands. Hi, Bart man. And Bart has written to say, I have a question about the WNBC melody. I've been told it originates from the church bells around the NBC studios. The story says that the bells have played the NBC logo, but a different story tells me the logo is based on the initial owner, which would have been the General Electric Company, and when you play the abbreviation GEC on an instrument, you hear the notes from the NBC logo. So my question is, what's the real story, just to get this sorted out once and for all? Well, thank you very much. Let us talk about the NBC chimes, if we can. Now, what you just heard there, that was the first sound to ever be awarded an audio trademark in the United States. And there's only about 100 of them. You have to have a really iconic, identifiable sound to qualify for that. So other examples would be the MGM lion that roars at the beginning of motion pictures from MGM, or the Jolly Green Giant going ho, 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 or even the old AOL thing that said, "You've got mail." Those were audio trademarks because they have to be distinct and not likely to be confused with anything else. And you have to have done your best to promote that sound, to identify it with your product, whatever it is. Well, in the early days of radio, obviously, the sound was what identified networks and stations. The print logo was not really a thing at that time, so NBC started using chimes as an identifier, but really not at first. So we're going to talk about how those three notes came to be. But first, I want to point out that in the beginning, stations like WNBC, which Bart is asking about here, didn't use the NBC chimes melody in their jingles. That really didn't happen until the 70s. Now, NBC, the network, did have a weekend service called Monitor, which was heard on a lot of stations across the country. And they did do a jingle with the NBC chimes melody for that. Keep it set with Monitor. Singing Monitor to the tune of NBC. That was in the 60s. But as far as a local station jingle package, WNBC in this case, they really didn't do that until 1974 when they went to Pam's to get some of the classic WABC jingles resung for WNBC, because by 1974, WABC was not dealing with Pam's anymore, and about that time, cousin Bruce Morrow, made the move over to WNBC. So as part of that, they wanted to have some of that WABC atmosphere around him. And so they got some jingles then that did use the NBC chimes melody.
66 WNBC.
And why not? And then, of course, they really rang their chimes on this one.
66 rings your chimes. WNBC. Awake up and away. 66, start your day. WNBC.
Well, the other thing that happened was, through the years, that became really the station's logo. And when they finally came to jam in the 80s for jingles, we incorporated that actual chime into some of their jingles, including the famous Top of the Hour jingle. However, to make the chimes be in the same key that the jingle was in, we actually had to vary speed the chimes. We had to raise them up in speed so that they would come up in pitch. Why was the jingle not written in the right key to go with the chimes? I don't know, but that's why they sound a little different here. And of course, we kept chiming it up in other packages for them as well.
66 WNBC.
All right, so Bart's real question is, where did that melody come from? How did it originate? And the thing is that you have to go really far back into the early history of the NBC radio network, where they were doing, of course, in the early days, a lot of live dramas and concerts and variety shows and things. There was no television, so all those kind of shows were on the radio, and they would have a live announcer explaining to you what you were hearing and that you were listening to NBC. And I'm going to play you just a few seconds here from a little documentary on this subject that was done by a guy named Dallas Taylor, who has a podcast called 20,000 Hertz. They did an episode about the NBC chimes, and in this case, he was talking to a radio historian by the name of John Snyder.
Originally, the three notes were CAF, which had the same sound that we know today, just in a different key. Eventually, they used the notes GEC, which some people think stood for the General Electric Company.
That would have been the coolest branding story ever, having the GEC chimes stand for the General Electric Company. But we couldn't find any proof of that. Most historians think it was a coincidence.
So there you go. That's a really interesting and really long kind of audio fragment. And this kind of points it out why true legendary audio signatures like this one would come so well and work so well on television and radio uses since the good old days of the past until nowadays. So, as it points out, in the 70s, WNBC Radio in New York started to incorporate these legendary chimes into their logo melody, where in the jingles they sing 66 WNBC, and the NBC that comes after the letter W is in tune of the NBC chimes. But before that, they haven't been using that melody after all, because they got many jingles from different producers around America, and one of the most notable ones will be TM Productions in Dallas, Texas, who did several custom jingle packages for WNBC back then. There was Design 70, 71, 72, and then of course came Image 73. And Image 73 had a different logo melody inspired on those other 3 jingle packages that came before for WNBC, but of course they're not singing WNBC Radio 66 anymore, they're just singing 66 WNBC. Well, anyways, after the year 1973, WNBC decided to end contract with TM Productions, and then they signed on contract with PAMS. They wanted to get some really good old PAMS jingles inspired by the influences of Top 40 radio in the 1960s, when it was really booming into the airwaves. And of course they had a certain influence on one of their biggest competitors on the AM dial, and of course that is 77 WABC radio in New York. So WNBC got those jingles, but they added their logo melody instead of the 77 WABC logo melody. And you know that the WABC melody was actually inspired by a song all about Manhattan. Manhattan, which is one of the most popular and prettiest cities you can ever imagine in the state of New York. Okay, so by years forwards, 1974 to the early 80s, they incorporated a logo melody which uses the NBC chimes as a base for some of these examples.
WNBC.
WNBC weather break. Go, go! WNBC.
More fun, more music.
WNBC. The music sounds best on WNBC. You're gonna be there, there's gonna be a happiness.
66. WNBC.
Yeah! The best music.
WNBC.
Swing with music from the super hits. 66 WNBC. Your music authority. WNBC. Home of Hitline.
The in sound for the inset.
66 WNBC. 66 WNBC.
Music power.
66 WNBC. 66 WNBC. WNBC.
Playback.
61 WNBC New York.
This is news from 66 WNBC, New York.
So what you just heard right here are some examples that showcases how well the NBC chimes can be incorporated into a radio logo melody, and that works very well. Well, of course, some of the jingles you just heard are from the 70s and also the 80s, because at this time in 1986 to 1988, they were doing a time machine kind of format where they bring all the old oldies from the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Not only they were trying to sound like the WABC of the 1960s, but they also modified these classic jingles from pens created for WABC so that instead of singing WABC with their logo melody, it would sing WNBC with their logo melody, and sometimes they sonovoxed the N and put it in place of the letter A on some of these jingles. Very clever. Well, of course, in 1983, Jam Creative Productions, really legendary radio jingle company in Dallas, Texas, had to do custom jingles for WNBC, and they had to make really sure that their jingles would sound great on the air and would really redefine the sound of AM radio. Well, at least music radio in AM, if you're not confused with music radio on FM. That's a whole different story. But anyways, 1983, Nothing But Class, and 1985 with The Only One. Those are the two jingle packages that had the NBC chimes incorporated on WNBC, their logo melody. And here are some examples of these two packages.
66 WNBC. 66 WNBC. 66 WNBC. 66 WNBC. Imus in the morning, 66 WNBC. NBC, 66 WNBC. 66 WNBC. There's only one place like 66 WNBC. 66 WNBC. 66 WNBC. 66 WNBC. There's only one place for Imus in the morning. 66 WNBC. 66 WNBC. 66 WNBC. NBC 66 WNBC. 66 WNBC. 66 WNBC. 66 WNBC. Wolfman Jack. 66 WNBC. 66 WNBC. 66 WNBC. NBC. Happy holiday from 66 WNBC.